I want to talk about something I hear from women all the time. And you may have even said some version of this to yourself. And here's what it is. I know what I'm supposed to do. I just need to do it. And when I hear that from women, and I used to say it all the time, that comes out when we're talking about weight. They might want to lose, 10 or 20 pounds. They might even want to lose a whole lot more than that. And usually they're also telling me things like their clothes don't fit the way they used to. They're not feeling good about how their body looks. Um, and a lot of these women have kind of watched their weight slowly creep up over the last, 5 to 10 years usually. And they'll tell me, I know what I'm supposed to do. And I understand why they think that. I do. And again, all transparency, I used to think the same thing. And so I get why you think that because the women I talk to really do know a lot about health. They know a lot about nutrition. I mean, they know protein is important, for example. Vegetables and eating them, probably a good idea, right? Drinking water matters. Sleep matters. That walking or some type of movement matters and that strength training is important, especially as we get older. And you probably know that going to the pantry and eating half of what's in there at 9:30 is not helping you. And here's the thing, I work with capable, intelligent, often highly educated women who are in their 40s and 50s who know all of that stuff and they still can't figure out how to lose weight and keep it off. So I think we're looking at this the wrong way. I think we're turning all of that into a question of why can't I make myself do what I know I'm supposed to do? And that sounds reasonable. That sounds right-headed. Sounds logical, right? But inside that question is an assumption. It's like embedded in there. And that assumption is that knowing what to do and knowing how to make it work in your actual life are the same thing. And they're just not. That's what I want to talk about today. Think about how different this whole thing is from 20, 30, 40 years ago. When I was a teenager, well, even before that, I became interested in food, for example, diets more specifically, because I wanted to lose weight. I got interested, full transparency, I got interested in diets and food because I wanted to lose weight. And so if you think about that in terms of, an interest in nutrition and maybe even exercise, when we were back there, we did not have unlimited access to information, right? I mean, I equated, and a lot of you, when I talk to you, tell me the same thing. I thought about wanting to lose weight, so my repertoire of knowledge around that was really focused on how to diet, meaning cut food. And then I got into some more of the nuances of like what kinds of foods to cut. But there just was not access to information back then. And now, good God, you open Instagram and I'm not kidding, and you know this to be true, within 30 seconds to a minute, maybe a minute and a half, especially shorter time if you've been searching for information or talking about losing weight, you will be inundated with posts and ads and all kinds of things with with people telling you, about protein and how much you need and how many steps you should take and how stress and cortisol, they're ruining your life and you should fast and you shouldn't fast and you should work out before or you should eat before a workout and you know you shouldn't eat, before a workout. Now, add in perimenopause and menopause, and you're going to get even more information. That's just on Instagram. You open TikTok, and oh my God, there's a whole another slew of ads and information coming at you there. So the problem is not that women don't have enough information. In fact, a lot of women, most of the women I talk to, have an enormous amount of information, disconnected information though. And that's different, right? Because knowing that protein matters does not automatically tell you what your breakfast should look like on a Thursday morning, like this morning when you had 4.5 seconds to get out of the house. Knowing that sleep is important doesn't suddenly give you 8 uninterrupted hours when you're dealing with night sweats and other menopausal sleep disruptions and work and stress and perhaps aging parents and whatever else is going on in life. Knowing that walking matters or is important or something you should be doing doesn't magically mean you have an extra 45 free minutes in the morning, afternoon, or evening to get it done. And this is where I think we do something really unfair to ourselves. We take all of that information that we've accumulated, and somehow, because we know it, we assume that we should be perfectly capable of implementing it into our lives and executing it on a regular and consistent basis. So when we don't do that, then what happens is we don't question the strategy, we start to question ourselves. I need more discipline. I have to get serious. I've got to stop screwing around and get on this. I've got to be better and do better than this. And here's to me where all of that gets really psychologically expensive. When you believe you already know what to do, every time you don't do it, that becomes evidence against you. Skip the workout, I can't stay consistent. If you eat at night, I have no self-control. Start a diet on Monday, and by Thursday, you're at the drive-through at McDonald's or Sonic or whatever, and it becomes, this is what I always do. I can't stick to anything. And eventually, you're not questioning the strategy anymore. You're questioning yourself. And after enough rounds of doing that, you stop trusting yourself. And that not trusting yourself, that's a much bigger problem than whether you get enough protein at lunch or if you ate the right kind of breakfast. Yesterday, I shared a former client's, um, well, part of a transformation story of hers. And there's a piece in her story that illustrates this so well. When she first came to me, she told me that she'd really never struggled too much with her weight earlier in life, and then perimenopause happened. And so after a period of a few years, she had gained about 40 pounds. And this was not a woman who was, sitting around wondering if she should eat vegetables. She already knew. She told me that she ate pretty clean most of the time. She had done research. She had tried different things. She was taking vitamins and probiotics. She was even going to Pilates classes. She was an educated professional in the medical related field, for God's sake. So this is an intelligent, educated woman who was putting in effort, but her body hurt. She didn't have energy anymore. She told me that her feet were hurting from the extra weight that she was carrying around. And it was preventing her from playing with and being active, with her son. That was getting much harder. And when we started kind of talking about what she was eating, it was not a disaster. Like what she ate all day was not a disaster. Her breakfast and her lunch, as I recall, were usually pretty good. Then the evening came. And what she told me, the way she described her evening was she said it was a free for all. And I remember that phrase distinctly because I've heard that same thing from so many women. By evening time, it's just a free for all for me. And that's really worth looking at because if your breakfast and your lunch are reasonable, and then every night something changes, is it really useful for you to conclude that you don't know how to eat? Probably not. There's a pattern there. There's something that's happening over the course of your day, and it's physiological, it may be psychological, it may be environmental, and it's probably a combination of all of those things. And that's the part that I seek to understand. That's what you need to seek to understand. It's not what did you eat at 8:47 p.m. that is the question. The better question is what happened that made 8:47 p.m. so predictable. Those are very different questions. And as a coach, I look at those things in very different ways. I ask very different questions. Women women don't come into the next attempt at losing weight in a neutral space either. And this is important. Every woman comes to this place of needing and wanting to lose weight in midlife with a whole history that is important. They bring every attempt to lose weight with them, every diet, every plan, every restart on Monday, every time they lost weight and gained it back, they bring all of that with them. And I'm going to go on with this point, but I also want to say as I'm making this point about everything they bring with them, they also bring all of that metabolic history with them because every time you've dieted, every time you've lost weight and gained it, every year that goes by, that all creates a metabolic story that matters that you're bringing to this new space where you are wanting to lose weight too. Every time you tell yourself this time is going to be different, so all of that physiological, all of that psychological, all of that history affects where your body is and the approach that it needs to take. And it also affects how you approach that next attempt. That client that I mentioned, that I shared on social media about her. She actually told me when we were talking about, and she was considering working with me, she told me that she was afraid if she spent the money to do this again and she didn't stick with it and she let herself down again and she felt she would feel guilty about that again. And that was playing in her head as she was considering if she was going to work with me to give this a go and give herself a chance to solve this problem. Think about that. Her fear was not, what if this doesn't work? Her fear was, what if I don't do the work? Those are completely different fears, completely different things to be afraid about. Now, eventually, that client went from 185 pounds, I believe it was, down to the low. I want to say it was like 160, 162. I'd have to go back and look at I put it in the post, I think, yesterday.
She also lost like 29 inches from her body, and seven of those were from around her waist. So the woman who wasn't sure she could follow through and didn't know if she could trust herself to do the work did it. And that's why I said in that post yesterday, I said the weight, the 20 something pounds that she lost, that wasn't actually the most interesting part of her story. One of the most interesting parts of her story was the self trust that was restored in her. And I think that's also where we have to kind of add something else to this conversation. We're not doing all of this. When women come to me and when I approached my own weight loss journey, we're not doing all of this in the same body that we had at 28. Remember? Remember how a few minutes ago I talked about how, every time you make an attempt, every time you lost weight, every time you gained weight back, that it affected your metabolism? It 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 did. It does. But that doesn't mean that your metabolism completely falls off a cliff when you hit 50. And it doesn't mean that the history that the metabolism history, the metabolic history that you have brought to the place where you are now automatically means that you're never going to be able to lose the weight once you hit 50, and weight gain after 50 is inevitable. That's not true. But you do have to realize that your physiology, your metabolic story, your metabolism now, that's not irrelevant. There are hormonal changes that go on during perimenopause and menopause that can affect things like where you carry fat. It can affect your appetite. It can affect the hunger signals that your body has and their ability to read. It affects your sleep and your recovery and insulin sensitivity. It affects your body composition. You're also losing muscle. All of us are way more easily and at a more rapid pace, unless you're doing something to actively keep that from happening and to preserve your muscle, right? And meanwhile, keep in mind too, like you're not living in a lab. You're not living in a bubble. This body that has all this history and all these things going on with it, it's living inside a life that you have that very likely includes, a demanding career, perhaps adult kids who somehow still need us. It may include, a life that has, aging parents that you're concerned about, or you may be literally hands-on and helping to take care of. That life includes all kinds of different relationships, maybe financial considerations. You may be looking at, retirement and 100 other responsibilities. Sometimes you're trying to take care of everybody else while you're trying to figure out who the hell you are at this stage of life and what's life gonna look like for you for the next 5, 10, 20 years. So the answer cannot be just eat less, go on a diet, move more, join a gym. That cannot be the answer. But the answer also is not just that your hormones are broken and there's nothing you can do about it. And I think sometimes we think of those two explanations, if you will, as kind of a logical place, where our brain goes. But those are incredibly unsatisfying in terms of what they actually say about your real life. Your body matters. Absolutely, it does. And the life that that body is living matters. There's an intersection between those two things that are not just interesting, but extremely relevant in terms of whether or not you can be successful. Let's take the weight loss piece of it out of all of this theory for just a minute. Let's just talk about Wednesday, right? Let's talk about yesterday. Perhaps when you think about your day yesterday, maybe a part of that, how that day went, was because Tuesday night you didn't get really great sleep. And maybe yesterday you got up on Wednesday and you had coffee. Maybe you had breakfast, maybe you didn't. You were busy. Um, Maybe you had a decent lunch, but it was a little lighter lunch because you were trying to be good, kind of watch what you ate. 3 o'clock came around, you were tired, maybe you grabbed something, maybe you didn't because you were trying not to snack. 5:30 came around and you were legitimately hungry. 5:30, 6 o'clock, right? You were making dinner. You started kind of picking at it, pot picking, as my dad used to call it, but getting bites, right? Or maybe you grabbed a bag of chips or crackers or something out of the pantry while you were cooking. So you ate those and then you eat dinner. You finally were settling down, sitting down on the couch, maybe watching TV after dinner. And then later that night, you found yourself suddenly going to the pantry or to the refrigerator and looking for, I don't know, something snackish, maybe, maybe you have a sweet tooth. Maybe, you were looking for that crunchy something, whatever your thing is, right? And afterwards, how many times does that happen? Maybe it happened yesterday, but afterwards you thought, like, damn it, I did it again. So after that happens, you think about how you need to make up for that. You need to compensate. So you eat less. Maybe after that, the next day or the next few days, you skip breakfast because you want to try to do better. And now you've created the next day or the next few days and the history of what happened over, those few days. And what I'm trying to point out here, not doing very well of explaining this, is that none of those individual decisions, none of the things that happened, the light lunch, the evening snacking, none of those decisions that you made were particularly dramatic. And that's exactly why they're kind of easy to miss. Women look at the 9 p.m. eating and they think, okay, there's the problem. When in actuality, you need to be more interested in, and I'm definitely more interested in, what happened in the 13 hours before 9 p.m. Because the behavior you keep trying to eliminate may just be the last domino in a whole series of dominoes. It's not the first domino. It's definitely not the domino. Well, most likely it's not the domino that we need to zero in on an attack because it's the last domino in a series. And that's a really important distinction. So if you can think about it in terms of dominoes that fall and that eating at night being the last one, you got to think about all the way those dominoes were placed during the day. And this is where women often start trying to like change these individual pieces, right? They start looking at these dominoes as individual things. I'm going to change my food. I'm going to add in more exercise. I'm going to try to increase my protein. I'm going to try fasting. I'll add a supplement. Maybe it's my hormones. Maybe it's an insulin issue. Maybe I need to go back to tracking. And pretty soon you've changed 6 things and you actually have no idea which one of them was the right lever or the leader that mattered in what was going on. This is one of the biggest things that I have learned over the years of coaching so many women. The basics aren't necessarily basic when they interact with one another. Food affects hunger, sleep affects hunger and energy, energy affects your movement, movement affects your digestion and your glucose regulation, stress affects sleep, on and on and on. Your environment affects your choices, and your interpretation of all of this affects what you do tomorrow. See, it's a system. It's a complete system. So telling someone drink more water, eat more protein, that might be factually fine, but it's not a strategy. Get 10,000 steps. Fine, maybe, but still not a strategy. Strategy answers which things matter right now the most. How much do they matter? When does it matter? What works together? What can this woman realistically execute? And what do we learn from what happens next? That's completely different from focusing on tips. So here's what I want you to do after you listen to this podcast. And I really want you to do this. And this might sound kind of strange coming from somebody who has spent years helping women change their bodies. Don't immediately change anything. That's what I want you to do after listening to this. Don't immediately change anything. For a couple of days, I want you to get really super curious. I want you to watch your day. Don't watch it to turn it into some sort of a courtroom where you're on trial either. All right. So I don't want you labeling everything that you do as good and bad. I don't want you to announce, okay, tomorrow I'm going on a diet and I'm going to really fix this. I want you to look at your day and just collect some information. Think about, like, when am I actually hungry? When I'm eating, am I tired? Do I get enough food early in the day? What happens in the afternoon? What happens after dinner? What does a bad night's sleep do to me the next day? Outside of like work, how much movement am I actually getting in during the day? Are there times in the day where this actually feels easier, when things feel harder? What was different? When did my day feel different? And a question that I especially want you to notice, so write this down, like pause this is so important. Pause this episode, pause my voice, and write this down. Where does the day begin to get harder for me? Not when did I screw up? That's a whole different thing. Where in my day did it get harder? Those questions, and there are a slew more of that, but that's a good set of questions for you to start with. Those questions provide a ton of useful information. You shaming yourself about not staying on track and screwing it up and blah, blah, blah. Shame does not do anything useful to you. But the questions that I just gave you and taking time not to make changes, but to think about your day and genuinely reflect on them by answering those questions, that can be super useful information. So do that. After you listen to this, please message me and tell me that you're doing it. Do that. Get that information. I also want you to know something else. I've been doing something kind of behind the scenes that I want you to know about. So you're going to hear it from me here first. Years ago, I created a protocol that I would use with women. Um, and it was a pretty simple protocol. And I've used this with literally thousands and thousands and thousands of women. For several days, instead of throwing like 10 different strategies at these women, I had them focus on a certain number of small things, but together in a certain way. I had them focus on these things. And something really interesting happened when I did that. Their bodies responded. These were women who said they had tried everything And when I had them use this really fairly simple protocol over a few days, their bodies responded, despite having tried a million different things that didn't work from them before. Now, yes, these women oftentimes lost weight. They saw the scale drop. And sometimes it was several pounds that they would see the scale drop. And before somebody comes at me, look, no, I'm not claiming, and I never did claim that these women lost, 5 pounds of body fat over the course of 5 days. That is not what happened. That is not physiologically what was happening when they used this protocol. Changes in food volume, glycogen, water retention, sodium intake, digestion, and all kinds of other things can move the scale and fairly quickly. Never said it was fat loss, but that's really that wasn't the point. All right. The point was that women who had become convinced that nothing could work for them suddenly had evidence that my body responds when I give it the right inputs. That matters when you've spent years thinking nothing works. My metabolism is shot. My body will not lose weight anymore. And again, nothing works for me. Well, I have been going back through that old protocol recently and I'm changing it. And the reason I'm changing is because I'm a whole different coach now than when I created it. Whole different coaching philosophy, whole different mentor now than when I created that years ago. I've coached and mentored thousands of women over the course of the last several years. And so that experience has made me think about that protocol in a different way and understand different components about the effectiveness of it. I also understand midlife physiology so much better now. I understand behavior better, I understand cognitive components of this better. I understand the psychology of the foundation underlying all of this. I understand that psychology so much better. And frankly, there are things years ago that were taught that I wouldn't teach that, the way I taught things years ago, I would not teach them the same way that I do today. So I'm taking that protocol and I'm rebuilding it, not turning it into another diet kind of thing or like a detox sort of thing, not any of the crap that you see like that. And it's definitely not some, oh, reset your metabolism completely in 5 days sort of bullshit. Not at all. I am turning this protocol into a short experiment in getting a few important things to work together long enough for you to see what your body actually does. That's what I'm doing. And I'm gonna tell you more about that like really, really soon. But if you're listening to this and you're thinking like, but Lori, I do know what I'm supposed to do. I completely believe you. You probably know a shit ton. Maybe you even know more than what you realize you know, or you're giving yourself credit for. But maybe the question is not, why can't I make myself do what I already know? Maybe the question is, have I ever actually had the right things working together for long enough to see how my body responds? Two different situations revealed by two very different questions. And that's really what I want to explore with you next. So thanks for hanging in here. I know this was a lot longer episode. Didn't plan for it to be this long. But that's how it goes with me once I get on a roll. And I felt like it's time for me to tell you what's been kind of going on, what I've been like working on over here. So yeah, I'll tell you more about it. Thanks for being here today with me. I'll see you right back here next time.